Okay. Hello and welcome to the parsha class. Parsha Ki Tissa 5783, Shabbat of parsha Para as well. And for a quick summary of the parsha, just in a nutshell, the mitzvah of the Machzit HaShekel that we read about in Parshat Shkalim was given in this week's parsha, and that is going to support the building of the Mishkan. Part of the Mishkan, of course, also includes the Kiur, and we're told that B'Tzalel and Holiav are appointed to help build the Mishkan. We're given some of the mitzvot of Shabbat, which God willing we'll talk about a little bit. And the Moshe is on top of the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and the Jewish people think he has delayed, which leads them to build the golden calf. Why they built the golden calf we've spoken about in previous years. There's all kinds of reasons. The Sforno, the Meshech Chachma were some of the reasons we gave in previous years. And obviously we'll speak a little bit about the Egel, or maybe even a lot about the Egel in today's class. Moshe is told about this. He comes down, he stops it, he melts down the golden calf. He has the Jewish people drink it. Several people die, several people are punished, several thousand, I should say. And Moshe is then prays to Hashem to forgive the Jewish people. Actually, he prayed for them before as well. And Hashem forgives the Jewish people, so much so that he even gives the 13 midot of Hashem. He tells Moshe the secret to understanding how Hashem rules the world, more or less. And there are several other mitzvot are given at the end of the parsha. The Shalosh Regalim, the mitzvah to celebrate the three festive pilgrimage holidays, the laws of Basar B'Chalav. Moshe's face famously glows at the end of the parsha as an Keren Or Panav, which is worth discussing, and perhaps we will get a chance to do that. If not this year, then next year, from a very interesting perspective. That's quite a bit. It's a very long parsha. It's very let's call it a top-heavy parsha. The first two aliyot take up a lot of time, more than half of the parsha, the first two aliyot, because we want to get to the sin of the golden calf in the aliyah of the Levi. In theory, we have a Kohen and a Levi get the first two aliyot. And the sin of the golden calf is during the time of the Levi aliyah, because Levi was not involved, and the person getting the aliyah should not be embarrassed by the content of the aliyah. All right, that's a quick nutshell summary of the parsha. Let's now move right into the deeper dive. Let's see what we can learn. All right, Baruch Hashem. Here's the source sheet that was sent out to you by from Sefaria by email, and we'll start with, as I said before, the mitzvah of Shabbat is given in this week's parsha, and partially given in this week's parsha. We've also had the mitzvah of Shabbat and the 10 Commandments. And according to Chazal, the mitzvah of Shabbat was given to the Jewish people even earlier than that, in preparation for the 10 Commandments, perhaps. So the interesting aspects of this giving of the mitzvah of Shabbat is that it says here, just right there in the beginning, 31:13. Yep. Chapter 31, verse 13. It says, and you'd bet it said, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Ve'ata deber el bnei Yisrael lemor, you should speak to the Jewish people and say to them, Ach et shebtotai tishmoru. Ach, which means either however or but, nevertheless, my Shabbat, it's plural, Shabtotai tishmoru, you should keep. Ki ot hi beini uveinechem. It's a sign between me and Hashem. our commentaries that talk about how the fact that Shabtotai is plural and Ot-Hi is very obviously singular. Between me and them, for their generations, Ladat ki ani Hashem mikadishchem. I am Hashem who made them holy. And then it goes on with the mitzvah of Shmartem et Shabbat, keep the Shabbat, ki kodeshu, all right, etc., etc. So the Rashi there says, as I alluded to before, we have this strange word here of ach, however, or but for sure keep my Shabbat. So why is that word there? So it says Rashi, afal pi shetiyu redufim uzrizim v'zrizdut hamalacha. Remember, this parsha of Shabbat goes right smack dab in the middle of, or towards the end, really, of the discussion of building the Mishkan. So build the Mishkan. However, despite the fact that you're so ready and so willing and so eager to build the Mishkan, Shabbat al tidacha mipanecha. Shabbat should not be pushed aside. So even though there's this important, great, grand mitzvah of building the Mishkan, don't forget that Shabbat is there too. And you should keep the Shabbat. Kol achin v'rakin mi'utin l'ma'et Shabbat mimlechet Mishkan. So every time it says ach and rak, however, but in the Torah, they are used as a miut, as a limitation. He gets that from the Gemara, Rosh Hashanah. So then ach here obviously implies that Shabbat must be kept despite the fact that the tabernacle, the Mishkan, has to be made. Don't forget, let's have a miut. Let's not forget that there's still a Shabbat. Pretty good answer, right? Believe it or not, there are some problems with this answer. And the Ramban is going to expose them. There are answers to Ramban's questions, but that's not for today. Let's first get a good handle of what it is that the Ramban says. First, he quotes, of course, Rashi. Right, but then he says, this does not seem right to me. But Rashi said that means that even though that you're very zariz, you're very careful, you're very interested and worried about building the Mishkan, don't forget the Shabbat. The Shabbat is an exception. You don't build the Mishkan during Shabbat. That's what Rashi seems to be saying. Right? But there's a problem here. Why? He quotes that the rabbis taught about ach and rak, that there's a limitation. Yimayit b'shmirat Shabbat. Or the rabbis learned out, yeah, there is a limitation. There's a limitation in Shabbat, not in that there's a limitation in the Mishkan. And so don't forget that besides all the things you have to do, the Mishkan stop sometimes and think about Shabbat. No, it's Shabbat that has a limitation. That's what that word, that's what ach, that's how that's learned. It's in what's the context? The context is we're talking about Shabbat. So therefore, ach here is telling us that Shabbat has limitations. You might be shmirat Shabbat. Why? Ki hamiyutin etzlam b'chol makom yimatu b'davar hamutzevabo. The word ach means that there's a limitation. There has to be a limitation in the thing we're talking about. And what are we talking about here? Yes, the big picture is, like I said, that we were talking about the Mishkan, but here we're talking about Shabbat. So ach means that there's a limitation in Shabbat. So that if you want to say that the limitation, the miut, is in Melechat HaMishkan, yeah, mutar la'asota b'Shabbat. We find out that it's actually, you're allowed to do the things of the Mishkan on Shabbat. Right? There are things you can do on Shabbat in the Mishkan that you can't do anywhere else. So it's not like the Shabbat is somehow a limitation for the Mishkan. It's the other way around. So aval hamiyut hazel mila o lefikoach nefesh hayotze b'hem. Really, this limitation is about mila, something you're allowed to do on Shabbat. It's an exception to the rule. So you're allowed to break Shabbat for mila, and other things that are pikuach nefesh, save a life, and similar things. Shehen dochinoto, they push off Shabbat. That's how the word ach is learned, as we're about to see. V'chein amru b'Masechet Yoma. That's what the rabbi said in Masechet Yoma in the Yerushalmi. U'minyan maspek nefasha docha Shabbat. How do we know that danger to life can push off Shabbat? Rabbi Abahu Amar Rabbi Yochanan Amar ach et Shabtotai tishmoru. From this very word, from this very verse, we learn out this halacha that Shabbat can be pushed off sometimes, save a life, etc. So yes, it's a limitation, but it's not a limitation that Shabbat is a limitation on the Mishkan, like Rashi is saying, but the other way around. The Mishkan and maybe other mitzvot are a limitation on Shabbat. Shabbat. The fact that we know that the building of the Mishkan does not override Shabbat is not from the word ach. Because the Torah warns us here, Valder Pshat who came. And that's the simple explanation of this ach here. The Torah is saying, do all the work of the Mishkan, however, Shabbat you must keep. So basically, obviously, he's agreeing with Rashi, who said that the ach means that you should stop building the Mishkan to keep Shabbat. However, B'Torah Kohanim, it says, Yachol Yehei Binyan Beit Hamikdash Docha Shabbat. It might be thought, you might have thought that building the Mishkan is, or the Beit Hamikdash, as it says over there, overrides Shabbat. That's why the Torah has to say, Et Shabtotai Tishmoru Mikdashei Torah Ani H-Shem. That's why the Torah has to say, you keep my Shabbats, my Sabbaths, right? So what do we get from here? So there has to be a reason why Rashi chose, of all places, this word, this ach, in this place, to say that sometimes Shabbat is pushed off. Sometimes Shabbat pushes off other things. Whereas really the rabbis in the Talmud, at least in the Yerushalmi, seem to learn the exact opposite from the exact same verse. So there are commentators, like I said, there are answers to the problem of Rashi. The Maskil David has a very beautiful answer. Hopefully we'll get to it next year. But just so you know, it's always amazing to see how the brilliant scholars of our past look at the Torah and have completely opposite explanations and interpretations of one word. What does this ach mean? It means keep making the Mishkan except for keep Shabbat? Or does it mean that ach Shabbat, the Shabbat itself, has limitations within itself, that sometimes needs to have exceptions for times that you have to break Shabbat in order to, for example, save a life, or to do a Brit Milah, or some of the other examples that the Ramban gave. All right, good. That's how we're going to start. And now let's continue with, since we're already on the topic of Shabbat, by the way, the Ramban then continues to talk about why it's Shabtotai in plural and what that means. And he has this whole Kabbalistic thing of Shamar and Zachor. Those are two different aspects of Shabbat. We'll leave it for that for now. But a few verses later, 32:6. let's get into the sin of the golden calf. Moshe delays or is delayed on the mountain, or at least that's what the Jewish people think. They think that he is gone. He's not coming back. The Midrash says that they saw his funeral procession, that he was dead, and that's what they were concerned with. And that's all. That's all fine and good for our purposes. They were pretty convinced that he wasn't coming back, so they needed a new leader. That's the way Rashi understands it. And this new leader would be this golden calf. All right, Avodah Zarah, not a right thing to do. They obviously sinned, no question about it. But what's interesting is people kind of imagine in their heads that this is like a 5-second thing or 5-hour party or whatever it is. Actually, this took several days. There's when they approached Aaron, and Aaron told them, get the gold from your wives, and they pulled it out of their wives' ears, etc. Right? So that was perhaps a stall tactic of Aaron's that didn't go so well. And at that point, the Jewish people somehow cast a spell or cast gold, whatever it was. A golden calf emerged from the gold that they poured, and at that point, the Jewish people had this golden calf. And what does Aaron tell them? Let's have a party. Let's celebrate it tomorrow. That's already the next day. This is already several hours. And it was only in the morning when they got up to dance and everything else that Moshe is told about this. And that's what I wanted to focus on for a moment. Right? V'yashkimu mimacharat. They got up the next morning. V'yalu olot, and they gave burnt offerings. V'yagishu shlamim, and they sacrificed peace offerings. V'yeshiv ha'am le'achol, and they sat down to eat. V'shatu, and they drank. V'yakumu litzachek, and they got up to dance. So the Or HaChaim points out here that there's a very strange question. Now, when did Hashem, first of all, obviously Hashem knows the future and the past, so Hashem knew they were going to do this, granted. But when did this happen? When did they build the golden calf? So let's say on the 17th of Tammuz, right? And they're celebrating, they're dancing on the next day, on the 18th of Tammuz. So it's strange then that the next verse has this idea that Hashem tells to Moshe, go down Moses, lech raid. Is the next verse. Well, why did he wait so long? That's what the Or HaChaim wants to know. Kasha, it's very difficult. Lama lo asa Hashem baruch hu hargasha b'sh'ad she'aseh ha'egel hekaf umiyad. Why doesn't Hashem act immediately? Moshe, get down there. The Jewish people are celebrating the egel. He says, go down because the people have started doing evil things. But why wait until the next day? The evil thing they did was to make the egel. That was the previous day. Why did he wait until they would give these offerings, the burnt offerings, the peace offerings, the ode? More so, by waiting so long, she'im haya makpid al hadavar tekef miyad omer leMoshe reich. If he would have done it immediately, telling Moshe to go down immediately, lo hayu ba'im lidei zvicha le'elokei achirim, Elohim achirim. If they wouldn't have done, then they wouldn't be doing these sacrifices to these other gods. And because you might already have answers for him, he says, don't say this. Don't ein lomar. Don't tell me shekodem amar alav, that Hashem actually told him earlier. Elul shemoshe nit akev lahashiv charon af. But Moshe tried to appease Hashem, right? Sharei b'divrei Hashem nemar v'yishtachavu lo v'yizbechu lo. the Torah says regarding Moshe's words, it says that he's telling them that they're already prostrating themselves. They're sacrificing. That's what it says. It says vishtachavula, vizbechulo. So obviously, it didn't happen after. Obviously, Hashem is telling Moshe that they are already doing this. So you can't say that. So obviously they're doing these sacrifices, and only then does Moshe get sent down there. So why again does Hashem delay sending Moshe? And you might answer with another answer. You might say, you could say that maybe the Jewish people weren't really doing this particular act. They were only doing this because it says Gemara in Avodah Zarah that perhaps it wasn't. They weren't really fit to be doing this particular thing with the golden calf. So, but what happened was that if the entire community, the whole tzibur is doing Avodah Zarah, then you can realize that there's this tshuva, and tshuva can be accepted. Use this as an example of a time when the Jewish people did sin, and even the entire congregation can do teshuva. So this is why this happened. In other words, the Gemara is saying over there in Avodah Zarah, the Jewish people really weren't interested in the Avodah Zarah aspect of the golden calf. This only happened, and there's mystical explanations that maybe they lost their some sort of degree of their free choice, that they did this, that they didn't have any protection, the siyata d'shmaya that naturally we have that protects us from sinning like this. They lost all of that in order to sin, in order that any future generation that sins like this, we can point to this event and say, look, Hashem forgave us for this. Of course Hashem will forgive us for anything else. So that's why this event happened. In other words, Hashem orchestrated this to happen. So you might say that. Still, this lesson could have been done even without them doing the zvachim, even without them making these sacrifices. So why wait for that moment? Shebedibur rishon amru ele elokecha or Elohecha hare kibluha alehem leelokah. Right, when they were already guilty of avodah zarah when they said that these are your gods, O Israel, who took you out of Egypt. But just by saying that was bad enough. You don't need to make a sacrifice to be over avodah zarah. Shagam she'amru k'tzat mehem amru kain lo kulam, and he said earlier in his commentary that it wasn't everybody who did this, but the Eruv Rav who said this. Al Kopanu, nevertheless, shamu v'shatku kulam. Everybody heard it, so even if they didn't do the avodah zarah, they didn't fight against it, which is another mitzvah. So already they deserve some sort of punishment. Uvehechrech lomar shamu utim hu shelo hiskimu. It was the minority that didn't give their stamp of approval for this particular act. Shim hayu mirubim hayu omdim alehem v'horgim et omrim kain. So even if the majority didn't approve, they would have done something, right? They would have gotten up and killed the person who was saying such things as, "This is your God." V'imkein harei merubim mitchayvim b'din arev. Therefore, even the majority is responsible for this sin. V'nira lomar. So it seems correct to say. So all the excuses you could come up with why Moshe should have perhaps been sent later, they don't work. There has to be another reason why Moshe was sent a day later to stop the Jewish people. And it's something you might have not been thinking about, but it has to do with why Moshe was up there to begin with for as long as he was. This is because Hashem told Moshe that he needs to go to Har Sinai for 40 days when he would receive the Luchot. But Amram Zal, as the rabbis tell us in the Gemara in Shabbat 89a, the Pasuk Boshesh Moshe, that the people saw that Moshe delayed. Shabahu sheish sha'od biyom al-gvul shel arbaim. The reason that they thought this was because they saw that there were 6 hours had already passed into the 40th day that they were counting. Ki nemar lo me'Hashem shash yoshev arbaim. That way, they made a calculation that they miscalculated, but he was supposed to be up there for 40 days. That's the important number. Why? Asher al kain lo amar lo Hashem leMoshe laredet min hahar kodem 40 yom ad sofan. He did not tell Moshe to go down until those 40 days were up. Why? V'az amar ilav lech min hahar. And then he told him, go down from the mountain, v'yomru raid afarshanu b'mkomo. So he said, go down, raid. He's going to explain in the next verse. Shagam shehir gish Hashem b'masa Yisrael hara me'ed hikalam al Aaron. So even though he knew what terrible things the Jewish people were doing and how they were gathering against Aaron, etc., im kol zeh davar Elokeinu she'amar arba'im yom yakum leolam. You have to remember that he said it's going to be 40 days. That had to stick. Those 40 days had to happen. Because Hashem said that it was going to be 40 days. So it had to be 40 days. Now you might suggest, why didn't Hashem plan things out in a way that the Jews wouldn't mess up? Right, so let's just skip to this next part. So in other words, Moshe had to be there for 40 days and 40 nights. Why? Tam acher lo yesh ba daled drachim klalim v'hein minyan pardes. We've spoken about this before. There are 4 levels of Torah interpretation: Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. And those 4 things have to be taught over the course of 40 days and 40 nights. There's 4 things. Each one gets 10 days each, right? And 10 is, as he's going to explain Kabbalistically, is a unit. And they needed those 10 days each. So in other words, if Moshe would have left the mountain 1 day early and would have made it 39, first of all, it would make Hashem into a liar because he said 40 days. And besides that, he needed to be up there because he was up there for a reason. The reason was to receive the Torah completely, all of Pardes, all of the different levels of the Torah completely. If he would have been up there for 1 second less, 1 minute less, definitely a day less, he wouldn't have the entire Torah, and then you would have less Torah. And we know how important Torah is in the world. It's what keeps the world running. And if we wouldn't have the entire Torah, things would be a lot worse. So yes, it was bad for the Jewish people in the short run that Moshe had to be kept up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. But in the long run of history, the last 3,000 years that we've needed the Torah in order to survive, we wouldn't have had the Torah to do that. And who knows what would have happened? Well, H-Shem knows, as my daughter would say to that rhetorical question. Okay. All right, so that's there's more to it, and it's a beautiful essay. The point is, the Orach Chaim says that it's not that Hashem wanted to stall for some other reason. Hashem wanted Moshe to be up there for 40 days and 40 nights, and for that to happen, you need 40 days and 40 nights. And the reason why, perhaps one of the reasons why you need 40 days and 40 nights, is because indeed, that's how much Torah Moshe Rabbeinu needed to get for the days that he was up there. Okay. There's a common phrase that's repeated over and over in this week's parsha. It's a sort of derogatory term used for the Jewish people, and it's also used as maybe as an excuse for our behavior and reasons for punishment for our behavior, etc. And that phrase, as we're about to see, is Am Kshe Oref, a stiff-necked people with a stiff neck. All right, Am, nation, Kshe Oref. Kshe is difficult or hard. Oref is neck. So, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, chapter 32, verse 9, Hashem tells Moshe, when Moshe is trying to get forgiveness for the Jewish people, I've already seen it. I've seen this nation. I know this nation well. They are a stiff-necked people. Why is this phrase so important and so central to this entire episode? So answers of Moshe Sternbach, Shlita. In Tam V'dat, Nifleim Hadvarim. These words are a wonder. Very strange indeed. Amazing. Shachet atzmo lo hayadai bo kedei lichlotan. The sin itself of avodah zarah, the golden calf, and everything else, that's not enough for them to get punished. V'rak mishamayim shehem kashi oref shema minim lishmoa mochihem. It's their stubbornness that gives them a reason. Bikesh HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahashmidom lule Moshe bechiro amad beporetz she'en lecha mida grua mekashiot Adef Shavin Ha'adam Yachol Litakim B'drachav Yasher Libo Asher Hu Ra Benura. So Benara. So the sin of the golden calf is not why the Jewish people get punished. The number one reason why they get punished, turns out, is because of this particular midah. That's why Hashem punishes them, not because of the golden calf, but because we are stiff-necked, because we are stubborn, and stubbornness is a very terrible quality. He quotes from the Chazon Ish, from the Chazon Ish, that one of the ways to have peace in the home is to make sure that your spouse is not a stubborn person, right? It's a very bad midah that he says is easy to get inculcated into you and very hard to get rid of. So all the way from your youth, you should do whatever you can to avoid this midah of stubbornness, because it is the reason for most of our suffering in our history, and perhaps even in our personal lives. All right, let's skip ahead to chapter 32, verse 26. After Moshe comes down, and he is thank you, and he is ready to punish the Jewish people for the golden calf. A very interesting incident occurs. This is again repeated in the time of the Hanukkah story, according to the book of Maccabees. It says, this is chapter 32, verse 26. Yamod Moshe b'sha'ar ha'machane. Moshe stood at the entrance of the tent. Vayoma, and he said, Mila Hashem Elai, who is for Hashem come to with me? V'yasvu alav kol b'nei Levi, and all of b'nei Levi came to him. Writes the Netziv in Ha'amek Davar. Ein hakavana mi hu shelo avar avodat kohavet. His kavana wasn't, his intent wasn't who didn't serve idols, because that could have been very clear. Sharei rov Yisrael lo avdu avodat kohavet. Most Jews did not do that, and they're not the people who gathered with Moshe, right? So whatever his intent was, he got only b'nei Levi. So it must be something different. Who knows about himself? Shehu achla Hashem limsor nafsho v'chol asher lo avat Hashem v'chvodo. Everything that the person does is for Hashem. Who knows that about themselves? Right? Stop and think about why you do the things you do, and when you think about it, do you do them because Hashem told you to do them? So most people would not, hopefully, I don't know, hopefully is the right word, but I'm assuming nowadays for sure, people can't honestly say that they do things only because Hashem told them to do it. We've got our own personal reasons. We've got our own selfish reasons. Maybe we have even some selfless reasons, but maybe we want to help somebody. Again, that's not directly for Hashem. The only people who knew then that everything they did was for Hashem was Levi. Ein sha'amru b'rabber rosh parshas matot al ha'dechtiv v'oto tavo she'ata mipane atzmecha l'torah v'la'asok mitzvot ein lecha avoda acheret. That is the main job of being a Jew. Perush. You're not doing anything for yourself at all. Everything is clearly for Hashem. Who could say that? So why did Moshe ask for this? The reason why he asked for this particular thing, because if all he wanted to do was punish the people who did avodah zarah, he could really have anybody do it. The problem here is that he anticipated that there would be some struggle and some danger. And if there's some danger, you need somebody who's not going to get hurt in the struggle. And the only time he knew that for sure, this is a very dangerous thing. The people could have been fighting back. They could have started a civil war. So why did he say Misha Hashem Elai? Dezeh haklal tishchicha bezika shani eno ela misha osa mitzvah keteva ha'adam lekavod schar gumul im ba'avodah zarah im ba'olam haba aval misha hu mufresh la'Hashem b'li shum ratzon atzmo klal. So he's looking for people who are for sure going to do things only for Hashem and for no other reason whatsoever. Eino ruil lepachad mishum davar afilu hazika shechicha, and so he wouldn't be concerned that they could get hurt because somebody who is only acting for Hashem, is a shliach of Hashem, cannot get hurt in any way. Because somebody who's doing a mitzvah, it says in the Gemara, Says in the Gemara in Psachim, towards the beginning of Psachim. We're getting ready for Pesach already. And the Gemara in Psachim 8b, it says that a shliach mitzvah has nothing to fear. Somebody who's sent to do a mitzvah is going to be safe, as long as they're, there's you can ask questions about this. Obviously, there's people who've been sent to do a mitzvah and they get hurt. And it happens already in the Gemara, and they say that the answer is you have to have that kavana, you have to have that intent the entire time. If you're sent to do a mitzvah, but you take a break from the mitzvah and go to, a theme park, right? So you're not protected there. So if something happens to you, right? Az yachol livtoach bo shelo yatsa bishvul davar suken halaz. So the Jewish people could not get up and say that with all honesty, that everything they do is for Hashem. But the tribe of Levi could, and that was important at this point, especially because what we needed at this point was we needed people who would be willing to risk their lives and who would be safe, who would make a kiddush Hashem by surviving. And the only people who were up to that challenge at that point was the tribe of Levi. Okay, let's get to after the sin of the golden calf. Moshe is commanded to then make a second luchot. Make those tablets just like the first ones. And make the words on these tablets the same as the words that you made on those earlier tablets that you broke. And of course, a very common question, an important question is, why do we have to mention here that these are the luchot that Moshe broke, the first ones? Is that supposed to be like some sort of like dig at him? Like, you broke them, so you have to fix them. You have to replace them. You break or you buy, right? So, is that what's going on here? It doesn't seem right, especially considering one of the last Rashis, if not the last Rashi in Chumash, where H-Shem says of Moshe Rabbeinu that he did great things, and Rashi there tells us the great thing he did was that he decided to break the luchot on his own without being told, and Hashem agreed with him. The Gemara says it's one of the three times that Hashem gave a Moshe in a yesher koach. He did the right thing. Good job. You done good. So ask the Uznaim L'Torah, Rav Zalman Sorotzkin, Lama hosif asher shibarta. Why do you have to add these words that you broke? Right now, Hashem's telling Moshe, write the words that we had on the previous luchot. You could end it there. You've already referenced what you're looking for. That's good enough. Why do you have to add that you broke? Right? Nira shehosafa zu ba'alahotzi min hamakubal etzel b'nei adam yoshvei chosha. This important teaching is to contradict the words of those people who sit in darkness, shelo naga alehem or haTorah, that don't have the light of Torah on them. She'im paretz ha'am lavor al ezu mitzvah b'mitzvah Hashem. If the Jewish people separate themselves from one of the mitzvot that Hashem commanded, siman etzlam she'ein hatzibur yachol amod ba. It's a sign to these ignorant people who don't have Torah. It's a sign to them that this mitzvah is just not possible anymore. People aren't doing it, so it's not possible. It's not kilu. It's as if it's God forbid, as if it's been taken out of the Torah. The magic eraser was used. We deleted that mitzvah from the Torah. People have a tough time with it. They can't do it, so let's not do it. And that's why this verse ends with that you destroyed. Why? What's the connection? Lomar, this teaches you Moshe l'shaber et haluchot shneimar bahem lo ta'aseh lecha kol pesel. You might have thought, and since the Jewish people now worshipped an idol, and Moshe broke the luchot on which were written the words, do not bow down to idols, do not make for yourself an idol. Al kozeh lo batla chas v'shalom mitzvot lo tamarzu chatafti al haluchot et advarim asher hayu al haluchot rishonim asher shibarta. Write exactly the same words. Even though those words were ignored by the people previously, that doesn't mean that that mitzvah is no longer relevant. Davar Elokeinu yikom le'olam. The words of Hashem stand forever, like Rav Sternbach wrote. So, like the Or HaChaim wrote, Alfei avarinu v'yavdu min ha'olam lo levatel af ot achat metorat hakadosha. We can't even delete one word from our holy Torah. Every single thing in the Torah is relevant and is holy, and if the Jewish people have a hard time keeping it, that's not the fault of the Torah, that's a fault of the generation, and we need to work on it and make sure that we bring back these mitzvot, these mate mitzvah situations like the Chavetz Chaim did for Lashon Hara, for Shemirat HaLashon. Same thing with every mitzvah that we have that people ignore, unfortunately, often, whether it's Shabbat observance or tzniut or kashrut, you name it, lack of gemil chasadim, whatever the case may be, whatever you want to criticize our generation for, it's our job to bring new life to these mitzvot, not to delete them and say, they're not relevant because people can't do them. Let's find the relevance. Let's find a way to do it. Right. Okay. I think that this is the last piece that we have for today. Towards the end of the parsha, we're given a reminder of the mitzvot of the Shalosh Regalim, of the pilgrimage festivals. Shalosh Pa'amim b'shana, 3 times of the year, Yireh et Zuchurcha et Pnei Ha'adon Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Every male has the obligation 3 times a year when there was a Beit Hamikdash to go to Yerushalayim 3 times a year. Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot. Ki orosh goyim mipanecha. Right, you're going to have people, nations that are around you. Right, we hear bita. We hear chavti et gvulecha. They're going to be around your border. V'lo yachmod ish et artzecha. It's artzecha balatecha. And you don't have to worry about them wanting your land. You can go without any concern to see the face of Hashem these 3 times a year. Wow! 3 times a year, every able-bodied military man leaves his home to his kids and his wife, and they travel to Yerushalayim. Even those places, even those homes that are on the border with enemies salivating, dying for the opportunity to kill Jews and to take over their land. What is going on here? How could somebody promise such a thing? So first of all, this is one of the classic proofs. I believe Rav Hirsch brings this up. So one of the classic proofs that Torah is not from people, because no rational human being, besides the rationality of making up such a mitzvah, the rationality of accepting such a mitzvah would be ridiculous. Who would say yes to a man-made law like this, to a man-made promise? Oh, I promise you, nobody's going to want your land. Don't lock your door. Who's going to do that? So that's one thing. But another thing is, and this is very strange, the Meshech Chochmah points out, this isn't the first time we had this mitzvah. We had this mitzvah already in Parshat Mishpatim. And in Mishpatim, where we see it, chapter 23, verse 17, Shalosh Pa'amim b'shana, 3 times a year, Yira'eh chol zechurcha et pnei Adon Hashem. Your males are going to see the face of Hashem. Sounds good, right? Same wording, right? Except there's one thing missing. The whole idea of being afraid that somebody's going to take over your land does not seem to exist. What happened? Why are we warned about it now? Why weren't we warned about it in Mishpatim? And the answer is quite simple. Here, Parshas Mishpatim. I'm here on the second line here in the Meshech Chochmah. Parsha Mishpatim, Katav Shalosh Shanim Mishana, V'lo Siyam, V'lo Yachmod Ish et Artzach. So don't be afraid that someone's going to want your land. Hu Kamosha Amru B'Perek Ketzad, as it says in the Gemara, Ma'avrin She'al Malei Nishtavru Luchad Rishonot Lo Shalta Bahem Uma V'Lasha. It says that if the first luchot would not have been destroyed, then not a single nation would try to take over the Jewish people. Im kein lo hayu tzrichim lira pen yikach achar et artzam. So they didn't have to worry about that. That mitzvah in Mishpatim was written on the first luchot. Was written when the Jewish people were supposed to get only the first luchot. And the first luchot, the whole entire perception, right? The paradigm that the Jewish people were living in, the status that they had at that time was of a status where they didn't have to worry that other people would want their land. After they sinned, and after they had to get the second tablets, that's a aval, kan, but here, shenishtavu haluchot, where the luchot were destroyed, yicholim ha'umot, this is where the Jewish people could be attacked and conquered by other nations. Lachein utzrach Hashem itbarach lehabtiach she'al yidei mitzvot raya ruya haregel lo yazuko v'lo yachmod ish et artzam. Only in this particular mitzvah is there a specific promise that no one's going to harm you while you're away on getting this mitzvah of seeing Hashem during these 3 holidays. You don't have to worry about other nations attacking you and conquering your land at this point, but not where in the future, not where the Jewish people deserve to be attacked or anything else like that. So there's no promise that, while you're doing the mitzvah of Shabbat, or you're doing the mitzvah of tefillin or something else, that you're not going to get attacked. That can still happen because we don't have the protection that our status had when we had the first luchot. At this point, we're living in the world of second luchot, and therefore we are able now to be attacked, to even be conquered, as we were throughout our history, but not during that particular mitzvah of the pilgrimage festivals of the Shalosh Regalim. So that's why this had to be added to the mitzvah here after the second luchot, and did not have to be mentioned back in Mishpatim in that paradigm of the first luchot. And that's how the parsha pretty much concludes and gets us ready for Vayakam Pekudei, the last 2 parshiot of Sefer Shemot. I wish you all a good rest of your week. Enjoy, and beautiful, amazing Shabbat Shalom, Parshat Para. Take care.